Welcome everyone to day one of a Bot-Steber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control webinar series on mitigating wild boar conflict around the world and the potential for using fertility control. I am Monique Principe and I am the Managing Director of the Institute. We have a very full agenda and we're eager to get started. I'd like to thank all of our presenters who agreed to participate and to all of the attendees who registered. We had over 100 registrants from around the world for today's event and similar numbers for the upcoming weeks. So we look forward to hearing your questions during a question and answer period, which occurs in about 45 minutes or so. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A section on your screen at any time. And with that, I will introduce the Institute's Director for Science and Policy, Stephanie.
Thank you, Monique. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. As Monique said, I'm Stephanie Boyles-Griffin, and I serve as the Institute's Science and Policy Director. For years, fertility control has been proposed as a potential method for managing conflicts with wild boar. And given the prolific fecundity of these animals, and the fact that they're a management challenge on every continent in the world except maybe Antarctica, it's easy to understand why. So this webinar series was organized to provide professionals working in the wild boar control and conflict mitigation field with the opportunity to learn about the scale and scope of conflicts globally, some of the site-specific and/or population management methods that are currently being used to address these conflicts, and then highlight some of the important work that is being done to develop and evaluate the potential for incorporating fertility control methods into existing management programs. The webinar series has been organized so that each session will build upon information presented in the previous session. So after today's introductory sessions, should you miss a session over the next 3 weeks, we highly recommend taking some time to view any sessions you missed prior to participating in future sessions. We will make those recorded sessions available to registrants so you can watch them again if you wish, or catch up before participating in the next one. Monique?
Thank you. With that, I'm going to proceed to our first presenter, Giovanna Masi. Dr. Masi is based at the Animal and Plant Health Agency in York, United Kingdom. She is a leader in research and development on fertility control to mitigate human-wildlife conflict in the UK and overseas. She received her Bachelor of Science degree from University of Florence in Italy and her PhD in wild boar ecology from the University of Aberdeen. Her research focused on ecology and management of wild boar and feral pigs and on fertility control to manage wildlife and free-roaming livestock. Giovanna published 2 books on the natural history and management of wild boar and about 170, that's 70, scientific papers and articles on wildlife management and behavioral ecology. She is also a member of the Bot-Steber Institute's advisory board. And with that, we will begin the presentation. Giovanna?
Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Stephanie. And hello, everybody. I'm honored to open the first webinar of the series. I would like to start with a brief overview of the world distribution and trends in numbers of wild boar and wild pigs. I'll be using both terms interchangeably. And I'll then talk about the reasons for the recent increase in numbers and range of the species throughout the world, about their impact, and about the methods that we have to mitigate the economic and environmental impact of these species. Next slide, please. The native range of wild boar is Eurasia, but the species has been introduced in every single continent of the world, with excluding Antarctica. Looking at a map of the worldwide human distribution, the native range of wild boar overlaps with the most overcrowded countries that includes Southeast Asia, and Europe. And this is also where most of the human wild boar conflicts exist at present. Another important factor, next please, is that recently the number of people living in urban area has surpassed the number of people living in rural areas, and the trend will continue. This is important because people living in towns and cities are rarely exposed to wildlife, but have very strong opinions on how to manage wildlife. And there is a growing public antipathy towards lethal methods to manage wildlife, including wild boar. Next one, please. In the last decades, wild boar and feral pigs have increased significantly. In the top part of the slide, there is the increase from 1982 to 2016 in the States, and in the lower part of the slides, Australia. Next slide, please. Some years ago, some colleagues and I examined the trends of the number of wild boar harvested in 18 European countries in the last 30 years. On the x-axis, there's time, and on the y-axis is the number harvested each year. The key point here is that the country doesn't matter because the trend is upwards in every single country. And after this paper was published, Germany, which is roughly the size of Texas, harvested in excess of 820,000 wild boar in 2017-2018, or wild pigs. So in excess of 800,000 in a year. Next one, please. This is a typical example of wild boar expansion in a country, in this case in France. From left to right, different colors represent the number of animals shot per year in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the early 2000s. As you can see, the wild boar expansion was dramatic. The darker the area, the more wild boar shot per region. It was dramatic both in terms of numbers and range. And this reflects similar trends in many other populations around the world. Next one, please. We also looked at the trends in number of hunters in Europe, and the results show that the number of hunters is stable or declining in most countries, and this seems to be the case for other countries around the world. This means that the main cause of mortality for wild boar is not there anymore, or is certainly declining. Next one, please. The reason for the expansion in numbers and range are many. Lack of large predators, reforestation, the area covered by forests, certainly in the US and in Europe, has increased in the last decades. Supplementary feeding and illegal translocations, often carried out for sporting activities. The availability and timing of crops and mild winters. And also generally, there's no monitoring of the effects of population control. Next one, please. The biology of the species is also a contributing factor to its spread and demographic increase. Wild boar can live up to 12 to 15 years if not hunted. Excuse me. The main cause of mortality is hunting, followed by predators, harsh winters and summers, and traffic accidents. Population growth rate following the study by Bieber and Roof is between 0.8 and 1.6 per year. This means that demographic explosions are not uncommon for the species, which has the highest reproductive rate among ungulates. Next one, please. The economic and environmental impact of the species is very significant and includes damage to crops, amenities and infrastructures, disease transmission, threats to native species, traffic accidents, predation on livestock, attacks on people and dogs. A typical example of a significant impact that can cost billions of dollars is outbreaks of diseases like classical swine fever or African swine fever or foot and mouth disease. Next one, please. Wild boar are often described as ecosystem engineers. That's because if there are wild boar in an area, you will know it. It will be quite obvious. They impact on soil nutrients through the rooting activity. They are prey for wolves, tigers, and dingoes. They are very good competitors with a number of other species. They affect plant and animal species number and composition. They can establish symbiosis or commensalism with birds. Their routing disturbs the habitat for ground nesting mammals, invertebrates, birds. They prey on native species and they prey upon vertebrates and eggs and invertebrates. Next one, please. In terms of economic impact, there are examples, these are examples of crop damage. The bottom side of the slide is the strong correlation between the number of wild boar culled in France for 30 years and the compensation for crop damage. Wild boar were also responsible for 85% of crop damage attributed to ungulates, compared to 15% of the damage attributed to all deer species. And another example of economic impact I've already mentioned is disease outbreaks. Next one, please. There are several methods to decrease wild boar impact and numbers, and these include recreational ground hunting, culling from helicopters, professional shooters and trappers, exclusion, translocation, fertility control, and toxicants. And I would like briefly to comment on each of these methods based on my experience of working in several parts of the world. Next one, please. So first, I would like to stress that each method or combination of method is very context specific in that it can be used in some countries, but not in others. They may be legal in some countries, but not in others. They may have public support in some countries, but not in others. And there's definitely not a one-fits-all method that we could recommend for every single problem created by overabundant populations of wild boar or wild pigs. So recreational hunting is clearly unable to reduce the number of wild boar sufficiently. This is partly due to the number of hunters decreasing, but also possibly to the fact that at least some hunters are not interested in being the main actors to reducing the number of wild boar. Recreational hunting is also responsible for illegal introduction, and in some countries have banned hunting for this reason. However, recreational hunting is inexpensive and can be used as proactive or reactive method, although it may affect the social and the spatial behavior of wild boar and wild pigs, and this may have negative consequences for the transmission of diseases. Professional shooting and trapping can lead to quick reductions in numbers. This method is often used as reactive, but is expensive and thus limited in time and space. And culling from helicopters leads to quick reductions, but can be expensive, thus limited in time and space, and it is often used as reactive with potential issues for animal welfare. This method is certainly not feasible in areas with high densities of people because you run the risk of shooting people rather than pigs. Next one, please. Toxicants can lead to quick reduction in numbers. They are relatively inexpensive, but the use of poison is illegal in some countries, and I can see it is only increasing. The use of poison generally is not necessarily publicly supported, at least in some part of the world, Europe being one. This method is often used as reactive. Toxicants are very much context specific in terms of public support, because in some areas, like many European countries, they are banned. You can't use them, they're illegal. But in other countries, they're very much publicly supported, for instance, by farmers. I believe this is the case of the States, and I'm thinking about a recent paper published in 2020 on this. Different toxicants have animal welfare issues, or may have animal welfare issues, may affect non-target species and the food chain. Exclusion, such as electric fencing, leads to a quick reduction of impact. It certainly does not impact on population size because the problem is shifted and has no impact on welfare. However, exclusion is expensive and thus limited in time and space, and is often used as proactive, for instance, by farmers before a crop becomes vulnerable to wild boar and wild pigs. Next one, please. Translocations is something that people love because they lead to quick reduction. They are very much publicly supported because they appear as a quick fix to solve a problem. However, translocations are expensive and are often used as reactive. When animals are translocated, their pathogens are also translocated. So this is something to keep in mind if opting for this method. Furthermore, animal translocated return home or start to reoffend in the new area where they've been moved to, thus causing the same problem that originated their translocation. And translocation make people believe the problem is solved when in reality, the problem has just moved elsewhere. Fertility control leads to slow reduction in numbers because animals that are infertile remain alive until their natural death. Fertility control is generally publicly supported, but it is expensive if done by injected drugs only. It is often used as proactive, but can also be used as reactive. On the bright side, is unlikely to affect social or spatial behavior. And currently, we do not have oral contraceptives that are badly needed to manage large populations of animals. Next one, please. Two papers have been published recently by Pepin et al. And by my group led by my colleague Simon Croft, and they both suggested that incorporating fertility control into culling for wild pigs and wild boar could be more efficient than using culling alone, at least in some context. I will not tell you more about this because I'm aware that both colleagues will present the results of their work later, but it's encouraging to know that fertility control has an important role to play in this area, as suggested by two independent groups. Next one, please. So I worked almost 20 years on fertility control for wildlife. And when people ask me, when is a good idea to use it? My answer is always, when lethal control is either illegal or unacceptable or not feasible or not sustainable or environmentally hazardous or ineffective when used as a sole method of management. We are currently running two parallel projects with research group in a peri-urban area of Spain and another one on Hong Kong. And we're looking at the feasibility of using immunocontrceptives to manage overabundant populations of wild boar. I'm hoping to come back in 1 or 2 years to tell you more about the results. We only have preliminary data now. Next one, please. So to conclude, the methods to reduce the impact of wild boar and feral pigs are context specific, vary in cost, feasibility, and public support. Some of these methods can be used as complementary, and I'm convinced that fertility control has an important role to play, particularly if we develop safe and effective oral contraceptives. Developing oral contraceptives and funding research in this area is key if we are serious about providing an extra much needed tool to manage the species before it continues to grow indefinitely. There are a number of potential oral contraceptives that my group and other colleagues are testing as we speak. The good news is that we already have systems to deliver these contraceptives to wild boar and wild pigs, and wild boar and wild pigs only. And this will be the topic of other webinars later on in this series. Next one, please. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the many colleagues that are busy in this area, as well as the many colleagues in my group that work with me to develop oral contraceptives and to develop methods to quantify the impact of different population control interventions. In particular, I would like to thank the Botsieber Institute for Wildlife Fertility Control for organizing the series and for spearheading this topic for wild boar and for wildlife in general. But also thank you very much to all of you for listening, and I will be available for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. So next, we will play for you a compilation of short video presentations that will feature stakeholders from several countries to highlight various perspectives and challenges from around the world on managing conflicts with wild boar.
Just stick with us as we transition to the video. Thank you.
Hi, this is Umapati. I briefly introduce human wild boar conflicts in India. As most of you know, wild boar is one of the most distributed large mammals in the world and always associated with human modified landscape, especially near forest areas. Although in India their population not continuous but fragmented, but these fragmented populations sometimes become over abundant and have issues of conflicts, especially with the human, the farmers mostly. The conflicts varies from simple crop damage to human casualties. One of the studies in India showed that more than 300 people were killed by a wild boar in 5 North Indian states in a span of 20 years. Most of the casualties happened in the forest areas in the age group of 40 to 50. Mostly they are farmers as well. This shows the increased number of conflict not only North Indian state but also other part of the India. It's a time to control the population. Government of India have declared wild boar as a conflict animal and granted permission to the respective state government and officers to kill whenever required by the professional shooters. But there are other means of controlling the population. At the same time, some of the government not willing to shoot them for many reasons. So the other methods to control the population include fertility control measures by using contraceptive, immunocontraceptive methods. This will help control population not only India, elsewhere. Thank you.
Good day to everybody. My name is Ferran Jori, and I have a degree in veterinary medicine and also a PhD by the University of Barcelona in Spain. After working for some years in international cooperation for the development of poor resource countries in Africa and Latin America, I became employed by CIRAD, which is a French research center for international agricultural development, where I have been working for the past 25 years by studying more specifically the ecology and epidemiology of major livestock diseases circulating at the wild domestic interface. In this context, for instance, I had the opportunity for the last 15 years of investigating the circulation of African swine fever, mainly in Africa, but also in Europe, and specialized in the transmission of pathogens between wild and domestic suites in different parts of the world. From the ecological perspective, disease is known by many ecologists to act as a regulator of animal populations when the latter become overabundant. This phenomenon is easy to understand since a larger population has an impact on available food resources, which end up becoming scarce. And as a result, this lack of food availability reduces the fitness of animal hosts, which become more fragile and more susceptible to pathogens and to infections. In addition, higher abundance of animals also increases connectivity between individuals in a population, and therefore, for a pathogen, it becomes easier to jump from one infected to a susceptible individual and to infect a larger number of individuals in a population. Therefore, it is easy to imagine that the high increase of wild boar populations that has been detected since several decades in Eurasia and the Americas, at least in temperate zones, represents a very favorable situation for the maintenance and dissemination of some pathogens affecting wild boar. Those pathogens can, in some cases, regulate these populations of wild boar by killing some individuals, as it is happening, for instance, with African swine fever in some areas of the Baltic countries or Poland in Central Europe. The problem is that many of those pathogens, in some cases, can also affect other species of wildlife and also other domestic animals or humans, and can also contaminate the environment. This is the case, for instance, of bovine tuberculosis or hepatitis E virus, which are pathogens that have started proliferating in some areas of Europe when populations of wild boar become very dense, and which can be easily transmitted to humans when hunters are manipulating a wild boar carcass, for instance. Therefore, the home take message of this video is that the increase of wild boar populations that we are facing in some areas of Europe can have a considerable impact on the health of wild boar, but also of other species of wildlife, and also on domestic animals and human health. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for the invitation to give a presentation on wild boar and its management problems. I'm András Nálik from Hungary, professor of the Institute of Wildlife Biology and Management in the University of Sopron. The wild boar is widespread in Hungary, exceeding 5 individuals per square kilometer in many areas. The near exponential growth of the last 30 years is well illustrated by the increase in the number of kills by hunters, which was only temporarily interrupted for a few years by the introduction of mandatory shooting quotas and the full-year hunting season. There are a number of factors that contributed to the growth of the country's wild boar population, such as mild late winter and early spring, which helps the survival of the newborn piglets, baiting, which helps the winter survival of late-born youngs, the afforestation program, and so on. However, all of these may have been offset by the regulatory effect of the kills by hunting, but this didn't happen. The reason for this was that sport hunters were not able to achieve the high enough hunting pressure. There are a lot of problems connected to the overabundant wild boar populations, such as thin urbanization, conflicts with farmers, forest owners, and forest managers, increased vehicle collisions, and zoonosis caused by wild boar. However, all these problems have been overridden by ASF in the areas where it has appeared. The first ASF outbreak took place on April 14, 2018, through human transmission in the middle of the country, and the second reached Hungary from Ukraine on May 16. To date, it has infected a third of the country and crossed the river Danube, also by human transmission, endangering the densest populations in the southwest. What kind of management should be done in the infected areas? We were late in fencing the infected areas. However, using this method would have made it difficult to stop the spread of the disease because of the high density of wild boar in the area. Thus, the solution remained to drastically reduce population density in the surrounding non-infected areas. In 2020, shooting quotas were raised to 150% of the previous year on all non-infected hunting grounds of the country, but it couldn't be fulfilled. For year 2021, the goal set by the Animal Health Authority was a reduction to 0.5 individuals per square kilometer, the realization of which by hunting with sport hunters seems hopeless. Consequently, it seems necessary to use alternative methods, such as the capture and killing of wild boar and the control of fertility. However, both are met with strong resistance from hunters. To manage both the overabundant and ASF-infected populations, it is necessary to win the positive attitude of the human population, especially of those living in urban areas. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dave Pauley, Program Manager for the Wildlife Conflict Resolution for the Humane Society of the United States. I want to thank Bot-Stieber Institute for offering these Using Fertility Control to Mitigate Wild Pig Conflicts workshops. I have been involved in wildlife immunocontraception of skunks and deer and wild horses for most of my career, but specifically involved in wild pig management for the last dozen years, attending most of the conferences and serving on the Wild Pig Task Force Policy Subcommittee. During that time, there has been continual research and discussion about porcine fertility control internationally. But in the United States, those discussions have been overshadowed and sometimes derailed by the potential for oral toxicants. These toxicants, along with complete sounder trapping and sharpshooter programs, can be effective eradication strategies. But many areas like urban centers, golf courses, arboretums, nature centers, and most importantly, private properties where the landowner will not allow lethal controls shows a need for this alternative. For clarity, there are many areas where these totally lethal programs cannot be legally, socially, or practically deployed. And I predict that more property owners and managers will seek non-lethal alternatives once oral toxicants are deployed and become publicly experienced on a widespread basis. Next, there's a long history of species-specific and general integrated wildlife management case studies where we have, or should have, learned that almost exclusively, humans cannot kill their way to success on wildlife population control. From coyotes to nutria to Burmese pythons, we have learned that lethal controls are not standalone effective. Public education, better laws, better enforcement, and yes, birth control can be part of a complete control package. For wild pigs, all the research on toxicant encapsulation, palatability, species-specific and safe bait delivery systems makes the potential for replacement of an oral toxicant with an oral contraceptive much closer to potential reality than just a decade ago. So yes, it's not as simple as I just suggested, and we have lots of work to do. But the framework is here, and I think the time is right in the United States to embrace wild pig fertility control as an effective option for use in areas where lethal controls cannot be implemented or where longer population reduction can be tolerated. So thank you, and please enjoy these workshops.
Okay, so with that, we'll begin the Q&A for this session. I will read aloud the questions that have been submitted thus far, and I will either call upon one of our presenters to answer the question, or they can just chime in whenever they feel like it. So let me start looking through some of the questions. I know we have one so far. So Gio, can you hear me? Giovanna?
Yes, yes,
There
I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Stand by. Okay.
Okay.
So the first question so far is, has any country managed to stabilize or decrease its wild boar population? And if so, how?
Good question. Yes, plenty of countries have done so. That happened before and after the First and the Second World War, where people were hungry, and so the wild boar didn't have a chance. And that's why they went extinct from many areas, simply because they were a walking stake, that there was something that people could rely on for free meat. But after that, the increase in populations, certainly in Europe, started just after at the end of the Second World War, and it has never stopped. There are also, in some contexts, with outbreaks of African swine fever, there was effective depopulation of areas using a number of methods, including sharpshooters and professional hunters. But that's why I said it's very expensive, because you have to hire these people. And I think at some point, the countries were paying about $300 per sow shot in an area. So you can see that when you have hundreds of thousands, you run into many, many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars or euros or any other equivalent currency.
I'm sorry, another question that came in is, which methods are suitable for estimation of population, especially in situations when I think they're saying hunting bags is not applicable, meaning I'm assuming hunting is not applicable. I know that we may have somebody talking in depth about that in one of the later webinars that we'll be hosting, but do you want to just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so there are now a number of methods. In some instance, assuming that the hunters are honest in what they hunt, and the amount of effort, so the number of hunters that have participated into a hunt and the area covered, the number of animals culled can be used as a proxy for density. We have also successfully used camera traps to count wild boar. There's the random encounter method, and again, based on camera traps. And I think Rick Engelman has spoken about a number of activity signs, and we published a few papers with him on the activity signs that you can use to look at relative presence, so relative indices of density. They're all more or less reliable. Obviously, it depends on what you want to do with them. And there's been a number of papers recently published on how to count these animals.
Okay. Another question, this participant is saying, some people claim that contraception could have an impact on behavior, more time for feeding, other ranging behavior. They want to know why you stated that there was no impact and for you to explain more about that. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, okay. So in fact, we did, so the first time we used fertility control, we used a contraceptive in collaboration with colleagues from the National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins in the States. We used an injectable contraceptive, this is called Gonacon. We used it first in captivity, it worked fantastically well. So we went in the field and we injected tens of animals and looked, and then we put radio tracking collars on them so we knew what they were doing. And both in captivity certainly there was no difference whatsoever before and after the animals had been injected. In the wild, the evidence was not so strong because a large number of our animals ended up shot dead, so we couldn't retrieve the data. But for the few animals where we had it, it didn't seem to affect their spatial or temporal behavior. And I think, again, whatever I've said, everything is relative in terms of, we know that hunting, there are several papers that suggest that hunting will disrupt the behavior of animals and the social structure of wild boar and pigs. It's less known, you're right, about fertility control, but on a number of species, fertility control has been demonstrated to be less impactful on the behavior compared to lethal control. Lethal control like culling, not necessarily like poisoning.
Okay.
Stephanie, I just want to interrupt for a moment and remind people to submit their questions to the Q&A section. We have several coming in, Stephanie, via chat. I just wanted you to be aware of that. Yes. But yeah, if we could have them all come in via Q&A, then we don't have to monitor both.
Right.
And we also have a couple of the people who gave their video testimonials online. So if they would like to comment or join in the Q&A, feel free to participate.
Yes.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, what about purposely selective age sex hunting as it was previously practiced in part of Switzerland?
Is Andras Nalik online?
Yes, I am.
Do you want to take these? I can comment on these, but also you have a lot of experience on these, on how not so easy it is to select the pig you want.
So first of all, I think we have to reduce the number of youngs. This is the main reason for the reduction of the population. Here in Hungary, most of the people, most of the hunter thinks that the best practice is to shoot the big females. However, there were a lot of publications and a lot of investigations which showed that we have to shoot them when they are still young and not allow them to be older and to make reproduction.
Yes, and if I may add something to these, sometimes hunters themselves, or certainly the public, don't want to see piglets shot, dead. It's a very emotive issue, even sometimes among hunters, not only among the public.
Right.
Well, okay, I mean, not even piglets, but the young ones, which are half a year or 1 year old. So yeah. These could be shot without problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. Have you considered the previous attempt to use infertility in stray cats colonies and the impact on social behavior?
Can you repeat this
Sure.
question?
Have you considered the previous attempt to use infertility in stray cats, in stray cat colonies, and the impact on the social behavior?
So cats and wild boar are very different. And yes, there are a number of studies where they're looking at the social behavior of animals treated with contraceptives. It definitely depends on the species, on the natural history of the species, the biology, the ecology, and also on the contraceptive itself. So I don't think we can track parallels or make parallels between species. We can learn, we can see if something has found that the behavior of a species was affected in a way, we can look for that too in our species. But it's necessarily, you can find everything and the opposite of everything if you start comparing very different species.
Okay. Next question, whether oral contraceptives prove to be one of the successful methods to mitigate human wild boar conflict, and if so, which is the best contraceptive available? So I'm going to say that doesn't exist yet, correct, Gio?
Correct.
That's what a lot of us that may be participating in this series are looking towards is the development of oral contraceptives in addition to any injectable contraceptives like Omicron.
Correct. So my group and other groups around the world are very busy testing different oral contraceptives on other species, not on pigs or wild boar. If the contraceptives that we are testing at present, if they are found to be effective, are very, very likely to be effective on wild boar too. I'm not saying this because I'm a researcher looking for funding, but funding in this area is key to make something happen on a big, large scale. And I'm talking about millions here because it will cost millions to bring a new drug to the market, both in Europe and in the States. But I'm pretty sure with or without me and with or without my group, it will be worth it. And that's why I advocate funding in this area, because using injectable, you can do so much, but you're constrained by capturing animals. With oral contraceptive, we have a number of delivery systems that have been proven species specific, so where wild boar only or wild pigs can feed from. So we are already halfway, we've already won half of the battle.
Okay, here's more of a human dimensions question, Gio, and please, some of the folks that were so generous with their time and putting together their video recorded testimonials, if you want to chime in, please just unmute yourself and speak up. But so the question is, how can we bypass the hunter's interest in keeping a large population of wild boar when wildlife managers are attempting to decrease them with all kinds of lethal and non-lethal methods?
So I have a view, but I'm sure other colleagues might want to talk about it. I have met hunters that invited me to give talks about fertility control. So they were the first ones that realized that they were in Germany or in Austria also. They were the first one to realize that hunting was not the only solution. But I think that the question is much more complicated, because I think society is asking hunters to resolve a problem that belongs to everybody. Hunters hunt because it's a sport and they enjoy it. I don't know whether we should be asking hunters. I know that hunters sometimes are responsible for some of the problem we are experiencing, but also we shouldn't necessarily be asking hunters to resolve all these problems for us, because it's not in their interest. And if I was a hunter, I would say, no, I'm not in it to do you a favor. But maybe Anders or Dave, Pauley, or others have more to add?
Yeah, thank you, Giovanni. Stephanie, I would also just add, in the United States, we want to include can hunting or high fence hunting operations as part of the problem. So I think in both the high fence hunting and the regular recreational hunting, there needs to be more regulation, more emphasis on not allowing live pigs to be transported, both intrastate and interstate. And so I think regulation and enforcement is a key part. And then getting the state fish and game agencies to recognize that in some cases, hunting pigs is part of the problem and not necessarily part of the solution. So there has to be balance, but they need to look at all those issues. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the person asking the question is talking about something that was mentioned by, I believe, in one of the previous video testimonials, and that there are certain hunters that want a target-rich environment, and if what you're trying to do is reduce population densities, it works against their interests. So how do you get them on board and come to some sort of peace agreement with them about the needs of the many as opposed to the needs of the few? If these population increases are potentially a very serious public health and economic issue for the country in question. So we have another question, and please, anybody wants to jump in and talk about this. In the US, a product is just starting to be sold commercially as a contraceptive. It is called Hogstop. Does anyone know anything about it? Have any researchers done work on it? And then finally, will it hurt our collective efforts if this product is not effective, like many marketed wildlife repellents aren't truly effective? So that's 2 or 3 questions in one question. But first of all, does anybody know about Hogstop? I just learned of its existence really this week, actually. So I would not be the best person to talk about it. But great question. Anyone?
Is Hogstop sold as a repellent?
I don't think it's being sold as a repellent. It's actually being sold as a contraceptive. But like I said, I just learned of it this week, so I have not had time to research the active ingredient, how it works, anything like that.
I have the feeling, and I may be completely wrong here, and I have complicated access to internet. That it was, oh no, maybe it was Hog-Gone, that it was sodium nitrite. So that was a toxicant.
Yeah. This is Hogstop, S-T-O-P. So,
yeah.
And it's being marketed as a sperm inhibitor.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So if it's marketed as a sperm inhibitor, I don't want to be sued by the company, but I don't quite believe that sperm inhibitors are the answer, because that's why we often target females. Females are the ones that contribute to increase the population, and one male will be sufficient for many, many females. That's why I would like to see the data to believe it. And I'm open-minded about it, but I would like to see what is doing and whether it has been tested at population level, because before we can talk about it or even recommend it.
Okay.
Yes, I just heard about it this week also, and I think it's only been approved in the state of Texas by their Commissioner of Agriculture. So it's limited, but I do not know of any research being done.
And Dave, I'm assuming you also don't know whether it was already registered federally by the EPA in the United States, right?
I seriously doubt it, or it would have been on everybody's radar. But I'm not an authority on the regulatory end of it.
Right. I would have to look into that myself, because it was my impression that you could not register something like that in a state until it was federally approved. Then the states have the decision to make whether or not they want to register it. So that's interesting. We'll look into that more. So thank you so much for bringing that up. A great question that we'll look into further. And maybe by the end of this webinar series, we'll actually know more and be able to report more to the group. So, okay. So we're starting to get some comments on this. First of all, there was a question about POP estimates with camera traps using random encounter models. They wanted Giovanna to send the mentioned papers, and it looks like somebody, one of our participants has already done so, at least shared one. And then Michael Bodenchuk with USDA Wildlife Services in Texas just commented on HogStop saying, yes, it has been developed in Texas. And I think what he's saying is Alabama, the AI is cottonseed oil. The active ingredient is cottonseed oil, gossipol. But he also agreed with Gio's assessment that inhibiting males isn't practical for all of the reasons that she said. So, oh, and Mike also mentioned that it is EPA registered. So it did get EPA registration before it was registered in the state of Texas, which followed what I said, that typically I don't know of any exceptions where you don't get it registered with our EPA first before it can go to the states to make the decision at their ag departments whether or not they register it. And I think somebody just, there was another paper just attached. So if you are looking in the chat section and you'd like to see those papers on I'm gonna say it, random encounter models, 2 of them have been added to the chat. So anybody looking for those papers, please go to the chat. Couple of other questions to Dave Pauley. Your thoughts about the current effort to eradicate feral pigs within the political boundaries of selected states. Is this possible?
Yeah, I just saw that. Thank you, Mr. Selman. I think I understand the question, but my answer would be yes. In states of low density, in states where there's small numbers of pigs, eradication is a feasible goal. And I think the USDA and others, state agencies, are embracing that opportunity and doing it in the best manner possible. In those highly saturated states, along the Gulf Coast in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, over to California, eradication is, it took decades to get to the populations that they're at, and eradication is not a feasible alternative in the short run. So it has to do with hog density, with state politics, with the number of urban areas and private property concerns. But in limited areas, in those low volume states, eradication is feasible. Thank you for the question.
So it's 12 o'clock now, and I don't see any additional questions right now. So if one comes to mind, please save it. You can either email us and we can pass it along to one of our speakers. But since it's 12, we probably need to move on to the next session.
Okay, thank you everyone that participated in session 1. With that, we are going to move to session 2. We're right on time. It's excellent. Human dimensions. I am looking to see, our first speaker is Keith Carlisle, and I'm looking to see, yes, Keith has just joined us. So we can begin.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes. Can
Great.
you share your video as well? Is that okay with you?
I can. I had actually sent an email earlier this morning asking if you all could share it and was told that you would, but I can find it and pull it up quickly.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, we can do that. I just wondered if we could see you, Keith, or is that not possible?
See me. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's great. That's helpful. We love that.
Okay.
So let's begin session 2 of today's webinar, which is titled Human Dimensions. And our first presenter is Keith Carlisle. Keith Carlisle is a research associate in the Department of Human Dimensions of Natural Resources, Warner College of Natural Resources at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. And he also serves as a human dimension specialist. Is that right?
Human dimension specialist.
Human dimension specialist, I thought so. At the U.S. Department of Agriculture National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins, where his research focuses on the human aspects of wild pig damages and management. Keith, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to say briefly up front that although I am employed by Colorado State University, as Monique mentioned, I am based at the National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins. And all of my research is funded by the USDA's National Feral Swine Damage Management Program. And the focus of that research, my talk today, is human dimensions of wild pig management. So next slide, please. So I want to start by telling you why I think human dimensions research is critical to wild pig management. We all know that wild pigs have a number of traits that make them very difficult to control. They're intelligent, they're exceptionally adaptive, and they have a very high reproductive capacity. But there are also a number of human factors that make wild pigs a very challenging management problem. Now, one of these challenges stems from the fact that despite the damage wild pigs cause, some people find value in them. So one person's pest may be another person's favorite game animal, for example. So these people who may value them include hunters who enjoy hunting them and the industries that profit off of them, like meat processors and companies that offer guided wild pig hunting trips. So as a result of this, we encounter disagreement in places over management objectives. So people may disagree, for example, about whether the management focus should simply be on managing the damage, strategically reducing the population, or trying to eliminate wild pigs altogether. Now, we also encounter disagreement over the means that we use to reach those objectives. So, for example, should recreational hunting be part of our strategy to control wild pigs, or is recreational hunting part of the problem? And as others have mentioned today, there's evidence suggesting that if we allow wild pig hunting, that may stimulate more interest in wild pig hunting and lead people to transport and release them in new areas to hunt. Now, not everyone buys that. It's a little bit counterintuitive. And they think that not only should we allow wild pig hunting in order to try and control the population, but to even incentivize it through a bounty system, for example. You know, another question more relevant to today's talk is whether something like a toxicant or a fertility control should be part of our overall strategy to control wild pigs. Now, even if research indicates that these methods are safe and effective, we know from experience that there's still going to be concerns about adverse consequences to people and to the environment. Now, this is especially true when you're talking about an animal that some people actually consume. These disagreements and concerns are critical to understand and address because we absolutely need the public support and cooperation on this problem. This is every bit as much a human problem in my mind as it is a pig problem. So if we look at a state like Texas, for example, where wild pigs are present in every county but one, at least last time I heard, more than 95% of the land is privately owned. So if landowners aren't on board with what we're trying to achieve, we're going to have limited success. Now, human dimensions research can inform some of the decisions and strategies for managing the wild pig population. It can help us answer questions like, do people actually want wild pigs in their area? And if so, how many are acceptable? What control or management methods are acceptable? How aware is the public of wild pigs and the problems they cause? And is there any correlation between that awareness and support for wild pig control? Now, I'm going to say up front, in terms of fertility control for wild pigs, my team hasn't done any research to understand the public's attitudes and concerns. And we did a quick search before this talk, and we couldn't find any human dimensions studies in the US on attitudes towards wild pig fertility control. But there has been a fair amount of human dimensions research in the US that can provide useful insights when it comes to managing wild pigs and maybe give us some insights into what some of those concerns might be about fertility control. So if you could forward to the next slide, please. The most commonly measured psychological construct in human dimensions research is almost certainly attitudes. So an attitude is simply an evaluation of something as positive or negative. It's a very useful construct for helping us to predict management preferences and also behaviors. Now, attitudes in the US towards wild pigs, where they're a non-native invasive species, are consistently found to be negative. Large majorities of people, of stakeholder groups, of publics, have negative attitudes towards wild pigs and find them to be a nuisance or a pest. Now, my team has actually been involved in 2 recent large survey studies where we measured attitudes towards wild pigs. One was a 50-state survey of the general public, and the other was a survey of licensed hunters in Texas. That was a collaboration with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and John Tomachek's group there. Now, in both of these studies, clear majorities held unfavorable attitudes, and they supported most forms of lethal control towards wild pigs. However, what we found in the Texas study was a bit more nuanced than what we might find in a general public survey study. Next slide, please. So in the Texas study, we posed a series of what we call belief statements to the hunters. And we asked them to indicate whether they agree or disagree with the statements on a 5-point scale. And we used these results to infer general attitudes towards wild pigs. Now, I've just selected 2 of those belief statements here to illustrate a point. The first is wild pigs are a nuisance, and the second is wild pigs are a valuable resource for recreation, meat, or income in Texas. Now, you'll see that a large majority, 80%, agreed that wild pigs are a nuisance in Texas. However, half of the hunters also agreed that wild pigs are a valuable resource for recreation, meat, or income. So there's a large chunk of these hunters that recognize these competing qualities that wild pigs have. You know, you might be vulnerable to wild pig damages, but you might also benefit from hunting them, or you might earn income from letting others hunt them on your land. And this is partly what makes controlling wild pigs such a management challenge in a context like Texas, where there's an established wild pig hunting culture. They hold utilitarian value for a lot of people. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna stick with this Texas hunter survey for the rest of my short talk today, just to illustrate how these complicated or nuanced attitudes towards wild pigs translated into management preferences. So what you see on this slide are results from a survey question where we measured tolerance towards wild pigs. Now, tolerance is a term we use in human dimensions research to refer to the social carrying capacity for a species. Essentially, it's how many or how few of a particular species people would prefer to have in their areas. Now, in this survey, we measured tolerance by asking the Texas hunters what change in the wild pig population they would like to see in Texas. And we gave them 4 response options: completely removed, reduced, remain the same, and increased. And what you see on the slide are comparisons of responses between different groups of hunters. They represent groups that I would expect to have very different population preferences. So on the left is a comparison between hunters who told us that they grow crops and hunters who said they don't grow crops. And on the right is a comparison between hunters who hunt wild pigs and those who said they've never hunted wild pigs. And to be clear, there are statistical differences between these groups and their responses. But what I want to point out is that a majority of all these groups preferred that wild pig populations be reduced in Texas, but not eliminated, even if elimination were feasible, which we know at least in the short term it's not. So there's a recognition that wild pigs are a problem insofar as most hunters would like to see fewer of them. However, the fact that most hunters also prefer that wild pigs not be eliminated altogether reflects that value, that utilitarian value that a lot of hunters recognize. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to know how acceptable various wild pig management or control methods were to the hunters. And we presented them with a list of wild pig management and control methods. And we asked them to rate how acceptable each method was to them. These methods included things like ground shooting, aerial gunning, the use of non-lethal deterrents, and the use of a toxicant. Now, every management method that we presented to the hunters was acceptable to a majority of them, except for 2. And those 2 were toxicants and non-lethal deterrents. In the case of non-lethal deterrents, what's likely reflected here is that most hunters wanted the wild pig population to be reduced, and the use of a non-lethal deterrent would not be effective towards that end. Now, in the case of a toxicant, we drilled down a bit deeper because we wanted to understand who's opposed to them and what their specific concerns are. And what we found undermines somewhat the overly simple narrative that I sometimes hear, namely that all farmers support and are asking for a toxicant, but it's the wild pig hunters that oppose them. Now, to be sure, there's a grain of truth to that narrative. Hunters who grow crops and hunters who suffered economic damages from wild pigs did in fact show greater support for a toxicant. But a third of the farmers and a third of those who suffered economic damages from wild pigs still opposed a toxicant. Conversely, half of the hunters who told us that they primarily or exclusively hunt wild pigs on most of their hunting trips, so these are the more hardcore wild pig hunters, were either neutral or accepting of a toxicant. Now, we also asked the hunters to write in their specific concerns about toxicants, and in analyzing their responses, we found more than 30 discrete categories of concern. And I've listed the top 4 on this slide. The first one, concern about negative impacts to non-target species, was by far the most common concern. It was raised by a third of the hunters. And this is consistent with that other study I mentioned, the survey of the US general public. 1 in 3 members of the general public who took our survey also raised this concern. It was the most common concern in that public survey. Now, the next most common concerns were concern about human health and concern about impacts to water and soil. Now, it's not surprising that potential impacts to human health would be a concern because there are a number of people in Texas who eat wild pigs. And a number of the hunters wrote in that they were concerned that if the toxicant isn't fast acting, someone might shoot and eat a wild pig that had consumed the toxicant. So it was key to them that the toxicant killed the pig as quickly as possible so that no one mistakenly would shoot and eat a wild pig that had recently consumed the toxicant. Now, finally, we found that a little fewer than 10% of the hunters were concerned about what I'm calling on the slide unknown unknowns. Essentially, they felt it's impossible to know what all the long-term impacts might be when it comes to something like a toxicant, regardless of how much research has been done, right? They were a bit skeptical of the science and often pointed out how many times the public had been assured that a pesticide or toxicant had been safe, only to find out years later that there were unanticipated consequences. So I think we could reasonably predict that around 10% of the hunters in Texas are unlikely to be persuaded by any amount of outreach and engagement we might do on a toxicant. They're simply not going to be open to considering the research or the science. So this isn't an issue where we should expect to ever reach a consensus, but a majority support should be achievable if there's public engagement and in advance of a rollout. So because we haven't done the human dimensions research on wild pig fertility control, I can't say how similar the concerns that we're seeing about a toxicant would be to the concerns we might see about a contraceptive. I do suspect that some of them would be very similar, particularly concerns about impacts on the food chain and general skepticism about the science. Is it as safe as the research and science is telling us that it is? I'm going to close by mentioning that in this Texas survey, when we asked hunters to write in their concerns about the use of a toxicant, a small number, just under 100 hunters out of 37,000, actually wrote in that they would prefer a contraceptive or a sterilant as an alternative. And we hadn't primed them to say this in any way. We hadn't mentioned contraception or fertility control in the survey. So there does seem to be some interest or support for it out there at the moment. Last slide. So basically, that's all I have time to cover today in my 10 minutes. If you all have questions about any of this, I'm happy to answer them during the question and answer period.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Next, we are pleased to introduce Oliver Cooling. Oliver is a wildlife biologist who has been studying wild boar for 22 years. His degrees and doctorate focused on the behavior ecology of wild boar, the effects of hunting on wild boar behavior and management issues. He has experience with many wild boar related topics, including reproduction, virology, disease, and human dimensions. He was also the lead organizer of the 9th International Symposium on Wild Boar. So with that, Oliver, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Need to open this. And then hope to see now. So do you see my screen now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, okay. Sometimes it's quite slow. So then, yeah. So I'm a wildlife biologist. I'm not a specialist in human dimensions, but I worked also a bit on psychology in that thinking. So yes, as Keith also touched this a bit. So regulating wild boar population is somebody else's problem. Is more a question, or no, more a statement than a question. But first of all, how do humans influence wildlife? They could influence it directly by persecution or conservation, or indirectly by the destruction of environment and other things. So, and these actions are intentional or unconscious actions. For example, by side effects of changing legal regulations. And as already mentioned, we have high populations, population densities of wild boar and or feral swine all over the world, and this causes economic damages. Thus, a call for a reduction of the high wild boar populations is getting louder. Let's say by intensified hunting, but also by contraceptive immunovaccination or other means, or by mass culling and piglet trapping. And so for management concepts, there are a lot of open questions on the biology of wild boar, more or less, but also on the human dimension. We need to know what hunters do know about the wild boar, or what they think about the wild boar. Which hunting methods do they use, and if they are really willing or able to regulate wild boar populations. So, but first of all, a bit about the occurrence and about the hunting methods. Here you see the map of Central Europe, more or less, with the African swine, with the recent African swine fever cases, and you see there's a big spot close to the German border, and it has crossed the German border from Poland. And this is a map of Germany where you see the hunting indices. And Giovanna's already said we are leading in hunting bags in Germany. So you see there's a big band of high densities across Germany. And this is Lower Saxony, the federal state where I make my researches. And here a closer look to the map, and you see it is divided more or less in west and east. So in the western part, in the western half, we have lower wild boar densities, and in the east, quite high wild boar densities. Just for orientation, this is Hamburg. So, and we make questionnaires in a survey sent to the hunters or the owners of the hunting grounds for estimating small game species, other game species, but also for opinion polls. And here in 2004, we asked the hunters the first time, do you have wild boar in your hunting ground? Yes, frequently, no, rarely, or no wild boar. And in 2004, it was 22% of the hunting grounds having no wild boar at all. And in 2018, it was only 8% left. Yeah, the wild boar are occurring more or less everywhere. So then we asked, how did you hunt them? Not what are the methods you hunt them, but how did you shoot them? And so 1/3 of the wild boar in 2010, in this case, was shot on drive hunts, on moved hunts, more or less. Then 1/3 was shot on single hunt without baiting, and 1/3 was shot at the bait. from the height at the bait. So this is a quite important point, not only in Lower Saxony, not only in Germany, all over Europe, baiting plays an important role. And then we were thinking about why do the hunters hunt like they do? And so one of the questions was, do you regard a reduction of wild boar population as inevitable? In Lower Saxony, so a given answer in Lower Saxony, yes. 53% were thinking, yes, we have to reduce the wild boar in Lower Saxony. There are too many in Lower Saxony. 7% did say no, we do not have too many wild boar. And the rest was indeterminate or didn't give an answer. Yes, in Lower Saxony, we have too many wild boar, but not in my own hunting ground. Here it was only 43% left, 19% saying no, and the rest was indeterminate. But it was a bit more persons giving an answer. So it is always the problem of others. It's always somebody else's problem. So, and then if we have to reduce or to regulate wild boar, would you be willing to shoot specific age and sex classes, like the question before, for an effective reduction? So striped piglets or adult sows? No, I would not shoot a striped piglet. I'm not a baby killer, but yes, quite some more were willing to shoot more adult sows if this would help to reduce the wild boar. So which methods could help to reduce the population? And we gave a lot of, there were a lot of given answers, and so the non-hunting methods and regulation of baiting was quite unpopular. But I could imagine that today there could be much higher proportions of people who would say, yeah, capturing is okay and night vision rifle scopes are really promising because now they are legal. 10 years ago, they were not legal for hunting. So you see, it is the mind is changing also with the regulations. And we asked, did you hunt sufficiently? If not, why weren't you able to hunt sufficiently? And a lot of hunters then said, yes, we have a hunting ground within the fields. And the wild boar are only in our hunting ground in summer. And we have a bad hunting success then when the crops are high and you cannot shoot the piglets and you're not allowed to shoot the mothers. But also quite a lot did answer, we have a forest hunting ground and the wild boars are in the fields in summer. So yes, they are in the fields, but you have more or less 9 or 10 months to shoot them in the forest. They are only 2 or 3 months within the fields. And another important answer was dirty weather, so misty, foggy weather. Yes, on single hunt, this is an important point because you cannot see the wild boar if you hunt at the bait, and they are not really coming to the bait when they find enough other food. But on drive hunts, the weather is not that important. On the other hand, if the hunters did answer, yes, I did hunt sufficiently, why, or what are the reasons promoting the population increase? And here a lot of hunters said, no, our hunting bags are still constant. So some do not see the problem and others just do not hunt more just because it is needed. So to conclude, the hunting bags, as well as our inquiries, indicate that the wild boar populations increase, disperse, and populate all regions. The high reproductive rate has to be counteracted by sufficient harvest rates. And this problem is known by the hunters, but they do not implemented sufficiently. The reasons for that still have to be surveyed. But in the end, I think it is really important to consider or to incorporate the regional geography, but also the willingness and abilities of the hunters into hunting and management concepts. And that's all for now, and I will also be happy to answer your questions later.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Our final presenter today is Carme Rosell. Carme is a PhD in biology. She's director of Minuciar, I hope I said that correctly, wildlife consultancy, and a member of a research group at the University of Barcelona. Her work focuses on the mitigation of human-wildlife conflicts and has led to numerous projects and publications on wild boar damage mitigation. During the last decade, she has participated in projects about wildlife crossing design and monitoring, and about measures to reduce animal vehicle collisions. Co-author of the handbook Wildlife and Traffic and other guidelines on the topic. She is also a member of the Infrastructure and Ecology Network Europe Governance Board and coordinator of the working group Wildlife and Traffic Handbook Update. Carme, if you want to, yes, I see you, and it's all yours.
Yes, thank you. I hope you see also my presentation. So I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm in a remote small village in the Pyrenean Mountains, just at the border between France and Spain. So it's just a miracle that I can successfully reach all of you. Well, I'm talking about wild boar on the road, and I'm talking about how to avoid traffic accidents involving wild boar. Well, this is not working. Yeah. So first of all, a small flash. I think all of you, or in many countries, can show the same or similar slides. In my main working area, which is Catalonia in the northeast of Spain, we have this picture about the increase of hunting buck, which is parallel to the density of wild boar, also strong increase, which has been brought this conflict, strong conflict now, which is the accidents involving wild boar. Here you see the number per year of ungulate vehicle collisions, and we calculate it every 5 years. You see the increase in each period. The last one, an increase of 85% respect to the 5-year periods. I would like to say that 80% of the total animal vehicle collisions in our country is involving wild boar. Short news from other places also. Here you can see that if in Spain, close to 60% of the animal vehicle collisions are caused by wild boar, in other countries like Hungary or Sweden is less than 10%. So it varies. Really, in Mediterranean countries, we have a lot of accidents with wild boar. And see also here the number of injured people, how it has been grown in Sweden, slight injuries and severe injuries. So it's really a problem with high economic costs. We have estimated that each accident costs around 8,000 euros, because it's not only the damage to vehicle, it's lots of movements of people, police patrol, damage to our infrastructure, tons of carcasses, tons that which will require to be removed and properly disposed. Insurance claims, so a lot of noise, let me say, around this conflict. It's a conflict with a marked monthly and hourly variation. This is the picture. Most of the accidents are from September to January, and this will help us to prevent, you will see later. And most of the accidents occur during the first hours in the night. Yeah, this is a consistent pattern that we have observed in many different study areas where we have been, well, several different authors have collected this data. About solutions we are applying at this moment, I will devote some of my short time to talk about fencing and crossing. And one slide to remark that these two mitigation measures always should play together. They must be part of a mitigation, the same mitigation strategy, because with the fencing, we not are only avoiding that the animal access railways or roads, we are also guiding wild boar to proper and safe crossings, yeah, that will help them to cross, but also they will allow us to maintain or restore connectivity. This is, let's say, the standard wild boar fencing in our European handbooks. Yeah, it's not so high, 160 centimeters, but the critical point is that it must be buried at least 20 centimeters. In France, for example, is more, the obligation is 30. Some centimeters must be buried on the soil. I know this is not so easy. It obligates to make a hole and all this, more expensive, but it's absolutely critical because if not, many wild boar can go under the fence. Also, the mesh is important, the type of mesh, not the tongue-welded mesh is recommended, not torsion. And if you already have a fence and it's not buried, don't worry. You always can use this kind of reinforcement of welded mesh, only 5 centimeters of distance between the vertical wires, and which you can put it, the first centimeters are buried in the soil. And this is absolutely tested. We are using in airports, in railways, high-speed railways, which are fenced in Spain. And it has been really a successful way to prevent wild boar access to this infrastructure. There are many other systems like disanchoring racks of phenox and other, but not for us, it's not the same success. It depends on the product and how it's installed. Just a remark is you go for a fence, is don't forget the money you will need, not only for install, but for maintaining the fence. Lots of problems comes from vandalism, erosion, weather events. So keep a big budget for maintenance also. And where are we going with these fences? We obligate the animals to use any kind of transversal structure. Multi-use underpasses like this one, it's not constructed for wild boar, it's a forestry road, but it's excellent and it's being used for wild boars. It's just you need to, or we recommend you to use some improvements like screens that will avoid disturbance for traffic, this guiding fence, and separate the different uses that you have. Of course, wildlife underpasses constructed only for wildlife are wonderful. In Europe, it's recommended to have at least 50 meters wide, but I can say in Spain is 7 meters. And we have found wild boars crossing by smaller structures also. Viaducts, the best of the underpasses, of course. And if we go for the overpasses, we have the same multi-use overpass. If you can put some vegetation on the screens, it's wonderful. If not, at least some natural soil will help to encourage wild boar to use them. This nice wildlife overpass, this was constructed in an existing highway, so it's a defragmentation measure. And it was finished in 2016, and at this moment is extensively used by wild boar. And of course, the best of the best on the overpasses, the landscape bridges, which are called ecoducts, that allow to reconnect the habitats both sides of the road. Wild boars, we have been monitoring and use all these types of fauna passages. I show it, and these are on the aqueducts, on wildlife underpasses. And just a remark, we have been observing a strong habituation to use culverts, modified adapted culverts for the use of wildlife, but not only. And particularly when we are in close to urban areas where wild boar are used to humans, then they are also using very small, indeed small culverts. Yeah. Other measures in this short time, I don't have time to remark, but just a flash, you can also use this control of the vegetation on the verges, wildlife temporary signs. I told you that it's a temporary, and if it's a temporary phenomenon, so we can use this kind of reinforced signs, which are open only during when the conflict is active, but the rest of the year we deactivate. So when we open, the people living in this area notice the wild boar, let's say, risk period has arrived. There are also the signs activated by animal detection systems, you know, thermal cameras, radars, even sensors that could activate this message to drivers, but also there are a lot of innovative devices that not only send a message to drivers, but also some sounds, activate sounds or visual deterrents that try to deter wild boar, not always successful. Yeah. Of course, we also recommend the use of apps that can inform drivers about the risk of collision with wild boars and deer also, and informing about the clusters when you are entering in a hotspot, just to make them aware, be more alert. And well, it's all from my acknowledgements to all the organizations that have contributed funding or that are partners in our research, and also to my colleagues. And the last one is inviting you to keep posted if you are interested. This is the website, Handbook Wildlife and Traffic, which is being updated now. And here you have a transport ecology guidelines portal with lots of publications on the topic. And of course, if in our own website in Nuarte Publications. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay, so with that, we're going to start with our next Q&A session. So if all of our presenters would stand by, I'll start reading through some of the questions that have come in. I'm actually going to start with a question that came in right at the end of the last Q&A session for session 1. So if Gio's around and any of our folks that provided testimonials, just be aware I may be asking a question that you will want to give some feedback on. So the question is, do you think that in the large forested and country connected areas, as in most European countries, where the huge wild boar population is present, isn't it possible to apply any of the methods for wild boar fertility regulation? So oral or injectable. Anybody want to take that?
I'm happy to take that, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think the answer is yes. And the reason I'm saying yes is first because two separate groups have modeled the impact of fertility control on, well, at least one group in the States has modeled the impact of fertility control on open populations, but also because we have the means to distribute oral contraceptives to, and we know that we can distribute them to the majority of the population for the work that has been done so far in distributing vaccines against classical swine fever. So the method is the same. We know that we can reach the vast majority of the population by distributing baits that contain a contraceptive.
Okay. So the next question is, where from and or from whom one can study about Boar body language? Has there been any programs to inform residents about Boar body language? And I'm going to speculate that the person asking this question, this would be to complement existing public education programs, so that if people are knowledgeable about Boar behavior, they may be able to avoid any negative encounters with them that would involve like direct contact with the animal, bodily harm, because they would know if the animal was posing in a threatening way or felt threatened. The situation they would know by being able to read the animal's body language.
I have never heard about such a project or study, but I think so. In pure wild boar, I don't know how it is in feral swine, feral pigs, but in pure wild boar, you will not see a non-aggressive behavior as a passenger. Yeah, you will not see the wild boar in all the other behaviors, only when it's directly standing in front of you and is aggressive. So it does not make much sense.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good answer then. So we have one comment in the chat section. So I'm checking that just so that I don't miss anybody, but probably better to put your question to the Q&A. So this was for Carme. At what wild boar density would the intensive fencing work be justified in financial terms? I.e., it must cost a lot of when it would start to save money when compared to the financial costs of accidents. So how would you justify funding an intensive fencing program from a cost benefit standpoint, I guess?
Yeah, thank you. I guess that it's much more important than the wild boar density is the traffic intensity. I mean, we usually recommend that we must not fence continuously roads with low intensity of traffic. For example, less than 10,000, for example, if you are in small rural areas. Of course, it's not recommended to fence it, but some exceptions could be done when you have a hot spot with a high number of accidents, because as many of you know, they have some places in the landscape that wild boar tend to use more, the ecological connectors, and some areas that they use intensively for moving. In these areas, perhaps you can consider to fence a section just going from one underpass to another. So between two structures, or for example, between two bridges or between one tunnel, perhaps in this strategic fencing of a section could be really very, very useful.
Right. And then what you were saying about identifying hot spots, those are typically not necessarily where a wild pig population is densest, it's where those two things come together and the end results are bad, meaning you've got a high incidence rate of wildlife or wild pig vehicle collisions.
Yeah.
And then the potential impact on human health and safety Yeah. Okay. So thank you. That was great. And I think I have one more question for you, Carme. Does a 20-centimeter buried fence work sufficiently to prevent wild pigs from digging and then burrowing under the fence?
If it's 20 centimeters, yes, absolutely. This is enough for digging, to prevent digging from wild boar. As I told you, this is at the standards in Europe that we are preparing now the update and will be delivered in a few months. This is considered the minimum. You can go from 20 to 50. This is recommended. But what I can assure is we have installed it's 20 centimeters and it's working. Probably it depends also on the soil. If you have like sandy soil, perhaps you need more. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry,
okay.
Stephanie, a remark, because you have bring an important point, that it's sometimes we have these clusters, these hotspots in areas where we have something in the surroundings attracting wild boar. So, for example, in our researchers, one of the factors that is causing more wild boars accidents is when you have garbage containers close to the roads. It's like crazy. It's very simple, but it's like this. In rural areas, sometimes you have the garbages very close to the roads and you have a hotspot close. And you can move these containers to other places where are not causing some conflicts. So
sometimes it's not just excluding those areas, it's making them generally less hospitable, like attractive to them, by trying to identify things that are attracting them to those areas and keeps them from wanting to use them in the first place, so that you don't necessarily have to do something as expensive and labor intensive as putting up a fence to begin with. At least start there and work your way back, right?
Right, definitely.
Yeah. Stephanie, right. I think I received a chat message. It may have come directly to me for some reason. But it's for Carme again. If lethal toxicants are being deployed, would it greatly increase the risk for treated pigs to stumble onto roadways or populated areas?
Not so nice, of course. Yeah. In fact, we have seen that sometimes when the animals have some illness that cause any kind of problems, they are more frequently victims of traffic collision, for example, because they are disoriented or something like this. So if in a region you plan to go for this kind of methods, of course, it must be taken into consideration that in these circumstances, you need to fence probably the road to avoid the animals to go there and cause road traffic accidents. Yeah.
Okay, and then this is a general question, so anybody that it resonates with, please just feel free to chime in. Do you have any recommendation on how to engage the countries or to change the policy of a country in order to force a reduction in the wild boar population, especially countries that are currently dealing with the African swine fever incursion?
Yeah, this is a big problem, I think, because, for example, in Germany, the hunting is more or less a public right. The owner of the ground is owning the right to hunt there. So so this is a private property, and you cannot take this away. So if we want to force the private hunters, the recreational hunters to hunt more, then we need to change our basic laws first. because we cannot change the hunting law and say it's your duty now to regulate wild boar, because then you will change will have to change regulations on private properties. So it's quite complicated in the legislation. Yeah, you have to go down to the basic legislations in most of the European countries, and I think also in many of the states of the US.
Right. A follow-up question, this is from me. Following that, so the animals are owned on the private property where they exist, but then what happens when they leave that area? Are these areas closed or semi-closed, fenced in wildlife management preserves, or are they open? Can the animals move from one private piece of land to a public piece of land, and then vice versa, go back and forth?
Yeah, usually in most parts of Europe, the animals are not owned.
Okay.
So only if you have a fenced ground and you have wild boar which are farmed, but not if you have a farm which is fenced, but this farm is for cattle and not for wild boar, then they are not farmed, even if they are living in an enclosure. So if they leave this enclosure, they're still free range and wild feral wild boar, not owned by anybody. Yeah, okay. So to change these laws will become quite complicated.
I see. And then what do you think the percentage of private to public land is in a country like Germany, where these animals persist and their populations are expanding? That clearly is one of the complicating factors, right? It's the high percentage of private land compared to public land.
Most of the land is private land, but hunting is public on the private land. Okay. And there are very few farms where these animals like wild boar or fallow deer are owned by the farmers. So it's less than 1%.
And then people pay the private property owner for the privilege of going on their property to hunt wild boar, correct?
Usually our farms are mixed up. You have 1 hectare there and 10 hectares there and 20 hectares there. Mm-hmm. And so you have always a hunting ground on the municipality level. And this is in many of the European states, you have a common hunting ground. Yeah, right. There are very few private hunting grounds, but you can also lease it to another private hunter. If you're not a hunter on your own, then you can lease it.
Yeah. That sounds like very similar to deer hunting in the United States as well. So
yeah, to deer hunting, but in the United States you have different systems for different species. Yeah, right. Like in France you have for small game and for big game you have different systems. You have terrestrial hunting grounds, and in some departments you have at a river hunting ground for mallards or ducks. Yeah, it's two different hunting grounds in the same area.
Right.
If I may add something, Stephanie.
Sure, Jim.
So in the different European countries are very, very different. I would say, for the little I know about the States, in Europe, different countries are much more different than different countries in the States. And for instance, the proportion of privately owned land compares are very different. Sometimes, particularly in disease outbreaks, the state can take over and tell you what to do, whether you like it or not, if a landowner. So it really depends. And then there are other realities like Hong Kong, like Singapore, where there's serious overcrowding by people and very strong reluctance to use lethal methods.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could also just chime in here if we have
Sure.
time. So yeah, in the States, as a couple of you have alluded to, wildlife management is largely left to the individual states as opposed to the federal government. And we see quite a wide variety of laws and regulations across the US in terms of wild pigs. So at this point, more than half of the states have restrictions on transporting and or releasing live wild pigs. And some of the states that don't yet have wild pigs or don't have many have sort of learned from some of our southern states' experiences with wild pigs and have outlawed recreational hunting. There are even a couple of states, 2 or 3, that make it illegal to make any money off of wild pigs. So you can't sell them. You can't make money from, leading a guided hunt for wild pigs. So some states see that the problem is that there are incentives for people to want pigs around, and they're trying to eliminate those incentives before wild pigs even become a problem. I think that's one of the benefits of having states be able to develop their own policies. Is you could think of each of these states as sort of conducting their own policy experiments. What works, what doesn't work. Tennessee has tried incentivizing recreational hunting in the past, and it didn't really work out for them. They saw that wild pig populations spread. So other states are learning from what's worked and what's not worked in some of those states. And that's really, I think, one of the most effective ways to answer that original question of how do you get countries, or in our case, states, to take action. And I think part of it is if you can create networks where states or policymakers can learn from one another, what's worked and what's not worked in your particular context.
So, and then one final question I see here as we just run out of time. Thank you. Then one question, do you think that the reduction of the wild boar population will help to prevent the incursion of diseases? If so, any ideas on how many wild boars should be in a country in order to meet that threshold of preventing the incursion of diseases? That may be a tough question to answer, and maybe it'll depend on the country we're talking about. So anybody want to take that one?
In case of African swine fever, even a very low density has a high risk to get infected. So for the infection, a low density doesn't help very much, but for the spread of the disease, then lower densities may slow down the spread or may reduce the time of the epidemic phase, because it doesn't spread very fast, but it is really endemic. So, but Marius should know much better his own question, I would say.
Maybe he's asking the question for somebody else that didn't ask it. I wanted to know too. I don't know that there is a magic number to prevent disease incursion into a country where it doesn't already exist. So maybe for countries that don't have African swine fever, if there are any,
Sometimes I say only a dead wild boar is a good wild boar.
Well, all right. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap up for today since we've run out of time. I want to thank all of our participants, panelists, and I'm going to hand it over to Monique now to close us out.
Yeah, I'd just like to repeat thanks to everyone who joined us today. Day 2, important information on day 2 of this series. Same time next Thursday, the 17th of June. And the topics will be modeling and population surveying and tools and implementation. And they will include presentations from speakers in the US, UK, Germany, Australia, and Italy. And please contact us, the Botsteber Institute, at BIWFC@botsteber.org for the link to register, or with any follow-up questions you may have to this particular webinar or questions about future webinars. With that, I would like to thank everyone again. Thank you for attending. and I will conclude the webinar for today. Join us next week. Thank you very much.